or as Ayn Rand used to say, good premises. Everyone, welcome to a special edition of the Daily Objective as we convene at the Thursday Collective for a monthly book of the month, except it's not. It's the year end. And this is going to be book of the year. And we do want to hear from you in the chat. What is your book of the year? The book not necessarily published this year, but the one which made the biggest impression, had the biggest impact on you in 2022. And if you want your suggestions to stand out, you know what to do. Hit the dollar sign, the euro sign, whatever is showing for the super chat. Any money you put in supports ARCUK. End of the year, there could not be a better time to do it. Now, today's Thursday Collective brings together the hosts of the ARCUK's TV Talk, beginning with film and television star Mark Pellegrino and also the publisher, or excuse me, the video podcaster of The Reality Check. I mentioned earlier, way back in the previous century, before the turn of the century, I did a newsletter called The Reality Check. So I wholly approve of the name for Mark's project there. Mark Pellegrino, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good, Robert. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. And we have professional screenwriters, Jennifer Bouani and Jacqueline Schumann with us as well. Ladies, how are we?
We're excellent.
Excellent. Well, I'm Robert Nasir, podcast host, jack of all trades, master of none. And since we're talking books, let me start with the writers. Jacqueline, what are you bringing to the fore? What book had an impact on you in 2022?
God, that's evil. How could you do this to me?
Oh, you thought I would go in the reverse order.
I was totally ready to just like chill and wait until, no, but okay. All right. This is not a book that came out this year. In fact, this is a book that came out in 2005, and it has a very special place in my heart because we actually just got the legal book option for it. So it's a book that I'm on my third reading of it so far. It's a nonfiction book. And it's called, I generally do all my reading on iPad, so I don't have the actual hardcover, but it is called, can you guys see it? Okay. It's called A Fractured Mind, My Life with Multiple Personality Disorder, which is a bit, as I've been learning, it's a bit of a controversial personality disorder diagnosis in and of itself. It's now called dissociative identity disorder. And it is a rather autobiographical account told from the perspective of Robert Oxnam, who is Dr. Robert Oxnam, who rose very, very high in the sort of political advising culture he was a Asia expert. He was the president of the Asia Society. He prepped George Bush Sr. and Barbara Bush on all things China. He took Warren Buffett and Bill Gates to China on special trips. So he was very high up. He was on the McNeil Lehrer show all the time, interviewed by Jane Pauley, and found out in his 50s, that late 40s, early 50s, that he had a personality disorder called multiple personality disorder, which is what they called it then, dissociative, but now it's dissociative identity disorder. Some of you may ask, how could you live so long with this disorder and only learn about it very late in life? That's really, the book goes into some very interesting detail on that as well. His therapist has a stint to it, but it's a fascinating story because it tells the story of his 11 different personalities who all live in a castle. And Jennifer actually was the one who turned me on to it, is saying, just read this and tell me, what you think of it. And as soon as I got done reading it, I'm like, we have to make it. This would be an amazing series. So are we going to say something, Jennifer?
No.
But anyhow, and what I love about it is the solution to the disorder that they go into great detail with is a very objectivist themed solution, which is called integration. And it's all about taking these separate parts of yourself that have broken off due to extreme trauma and integrating them in a very cool, naturally holistic, objectivist way, if I can use the word holistic and objective in the same sentence without being thunderstruck. But anyhow, it's a great read. It's amazing on audio as well. I've done both audio and read it, just regular, sitting down and reading it. It's a great read. We just landed the rights to it, so I can talk about it now. It's very cool. I highly recommend it.
Jax, you mentioned an adaptation. Is this going to be more a documentary or a biopic, or what do we have in mind?
No, it's actually going to be fiction. We're fiction girls, so
okay.
It's drama. It is going to be it's going to be fiction. We're gonna create some new characters that weren't in the book, but as we were talking about on TV Talk last week or 2 weeks ago, when we talked about The Offer, the making of The Godfather, and how there were these amalgamation of characters created. So it's based on a true story, but it's going to be a fictionalized version. Thank you for asking and clarifying.
Oh, most excellent. I watch so little TV. I sometimes miss TV talks. I'm like, I haven't seen that yet. I'm so glad you did Enola Holmes recently. That was great fun. We've already got a super chat from Mary Aline. Thank you very much for that. A free chat from Regina says, hey ho, for me, it's Fossil Future from Alex Epstein. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. That might be a spoiler for somebody in the group here, but thank you. A Fractured Mind link is in the chat. And I'll move on to Jennifer. Jennifer, what is your book, or the first of your book of the years?
Well, what made the greatest impact on me this year was How to Pack for Moving. No, really, that had a great impact on me. I moved, if you were an audience member of TV Talk, you would know I moved from California to Colorado this year, and that took up a huge chunk of my time. I didn't do a lot of reading this year. In fact, a lot of my reading was audio, so I could multitask, but I did manage. I started to see a new guy a few months ago who is a nuclear engineer, and he brought up this book, and it's an old book that many of you have probably heard about, but it's been sitting on my shelf for 10 years at least. And I haven't even cracked it. But he mentioned it. And so as I was packing, I found it. It went to the top of the heap. I dusted off the dust. And once I settled in here in Colorado, I cracked it. And that book is A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking. Yeah. And I'm about 75%.
Sacrilege.
Yes. Well, you know what? I actually really kind of respect the book a lot, in that the fact that he's able to kind of cover these physics concepts without getting into the weeds, the technical weeds. There's no calculus or math. It's just, he's covering it in regular everyday language. And one of the important things, and I've learned a lot, and I feel like it's one of those books where you can read it several times and get something different each time. Like this time I picked up on things like why electrons orbit at the distance that they do from the nucleus. That was kind of interesting. He goes from Galileo to Newton to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. He talks about black holes. I learned about Hawking's
radiation.
Whatever. What is it?
Hawking radiation.
Yes, radiation on black holes. So it's not proven. It's just a theory. But I do respect his creative ability to theorize. He seems to appreciate empirical evidence that actually proves or disproves his theories. So I like that. But I thought it was really important to know that while I was reading this, I also went back to a book that I read a few years ago that now I can read with greater context, and that is The Dim Hypothesis. Chapter 6, Leonard Peikoff wrote on physics, modern physics. And so now I was able to go back to this because what Leonard Peikoff does is he puts Einstein, Heisenberg on that spectrum of disintegration, integration, and misintegration. Are they D1? Are their ideas D1, M2, whatever? And so I'm not going to give away, but I highly recommend, if you do read A Brief History of Time, to go back and read Leonard Peikoff's chapter 6, if you've read Dim Hypothesis, and put it into context to see what he says. So that really like broadened my mind this year, made me think a little bit deeper about physics, and I'm ready for my conversations with my new man.
Outstanding. And is the book actually brief, or is Hawking just being cheeky with us?
It is. It's only 200 pages, so it's digestible.
That
There's
sounds
another
pretty
book
concise.
he wrote after that called A Briefer History of Time. I haven't cracked that yet, but I think it includes string theory. So I'm like, I know that Leonard Peikoff didn't and Dim Hypothesis doesn't speak well of that. So anyway, so
Outstanding.
I'll throw in.
I don't think physicists do either anymore. I think string theory's been junked.
Yeah.
I'll throw in just on the tail of that, which is fairly brief, a book I read a long time ago. This doesn't count as my second one, but I'm just throwing it in. But 6 Easy Pieces by Richard Feynman. The brilliant the physicist who actually worked on, I think he even worked on the Manhattan Project. Or if you want to skip the physics altogether, read his autobiography called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It is a hilarious and fun read about a man with a brilliant sense of life. So that's a great one.
That's a book, one of the first books Jack's ever recommended me when we first met, when we were writing The Sandbox. Yeah, it's a good one.
Did that predate 5 Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson? I would assume he's playing off of that title.
Probably.
And that brings us to Mark Pellegrino. Mark, what book has had an impression on you this year? What's your 2022 book of the year, or at least your first one?
Well, I have to preface this by saying I'm not at home, so I don't have my library with me to refer to, and I don't always remember titles, and I don't have the titles and authors always at my beck and call. But one book that made quite an impression on me is by Burton Folsom Jr. It's called New Deal or Raw Deal. So anybody who doesn't know him, I believe he's a professor of history in Hillsdale College, and he often writes historical pieces that go very much against the grain of what may be considered conventional wisdom. And New Deal or Raw Deal, of course, exposes the corruption behind not only the origins of the New Deal, but also its intentions, and even delves a little bit into the psychology of the man who created the New Deal himself, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which I can appreciate because usually what we see are psychological profiles of Republican presidents. We never get to see exactly how sick, screwed up, and malignantly narcissistic the Democrats are. So people should know there's not a lock on psychosis in the Republican Party. The Democrats have their share of malignant narcissists too, and Roosevelt was certainly one of them. The origins of the New Deal were not quote unquote altruistic in nature. They exploited altruist moral premises to expand the political class. The New Deal programs were used as political patronage to make states dependent on the federal government and to draw them into the New Deal world and to create a much stronger New Deal faction within the government. And Roosevelt used it cynically during elections to pound people into submission. And I think the book is important, not only to see how corrupt these programs are at their core, but to see where they started. I mean, essentially, the way we look at government today started with with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his second Bill of Rights, his take on the way government and the individual should interact. That's all from him. That's all from his brain trust of socialist creeps. And it's stuck with us to this day. See the origins of it, see how it was truly born, see the corruption, mental, moral behind it, and check your premises after you read it.
Excellent. You know, I have to admit, because I think I'm as guilty of this as anybody, we are so used to that combination of altruism as a justification and complete power lust as a motivation on the left. And I think sometimes we're dismissive of it. And I think reading a book would be great for reminding ourselves just what we're up against. The right is so much of a roadblock to fighting the left that we sometimes think, yeah, the right's the issue. But no, that sounds like an outstanding recommendation, New Deal or Raw Deal.
When about was it published, Mark?
I don't remember, but you could also read The Myth of the Robber Barons by him as well. And he's written a couple of books on the Constitution, I think, that are fairly enlightening.
Yeah, New Deal or Raw Deal. I don't know why that's a tongue twister, but that was November of 2009. So that's fairly recent. Well, if you're my age, it's fairly recent. Outstanding. Well, that went reasonably quickly. I think we can do a second round. Oh, wait, I didn't give mine.
Wait, you got to go yours.
I do have to give mine real quick. Well, as if I can do anything real quick. My book recommendation for the year is a book I mentioned earlier in the year. A book by Martha Beck called The Way of Integrity, Finding the Path to Your True Self. This book was published in April of last year. I read it earlier this year, and I've discussed it once before back in May. And since then, the book has really stuck with me. When I talked about it before, I had taken it in on an audiobook and then watched a whole bunch of interviews with Martha Beck. Great stuff. But I decided, I had to get the Dead Tree version of it and go through it. Again, it's one of my New Year's resolutions is to complete the exercises because it's got a lot of exercises in it. The premise of the book is that integrity, living who we truly are and by what we really believe is both crucial to happiness. And for a lot of us, it's really the biggest roadblock. It's the biggest cause of emotional suffering. And, for any of us who have lost a little or, in some cases, a lot of who we really are due to the expectations of other people and the expectations of society and our own kind of artificial idea of who we need to be versus who we are, the path back to integrity is enormously challenging, but absolutely worth it. And Beck uses, it sounds a little quirky until you get used to it. She uses Dante's The Divine Comedy as a framework for the steps needed to reconnect to our own identity, our deepest selves, and map onto the four domains of the Divine Comedy. Passing through the dark wood of error, acknowledging that you're actually lost, that you have alienated yourself from your true self, and then getting through the inferno, letting go of what is causing your suffering. Passing through purgatory means living this new truth. And she acknowledges, and it's very step-by-step, very practical, what that actually means. If you're going to start saying what you really mean and living what you truly believe, that's going to cause a lot of problems. It's going to change everything. It's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. And it's very reasonable. She's very reasonable, very gentle, very intelligent. Triple degrees from Harvard. This is not some frou-frou book. Very sharp. And it's not radical honesty, which I've always said is a contradiction in terms. Radical honesty isn't radical and it's not honest. This idea of, I'm just going to tell everybody the first thing that's on my mind, no matter what it is. This isn't that. So yeah, I definitely recommend Martha Beck's The Way of Integrity. Again, a lot of exercises within each of those four domains of recapturing who you are. Ayn Rand talks about integrity in both ways, in terms of living by what you believe, being true to your word. It's the internal version of honesty, but also being true to your own consciousness, your own self. And this book I have found extremely valuable, even at my age, and I think I'm about as true to myself as most anybody I meet. even I have got a lot to get out of a book like this. So if you've ever had a sense of, I'm surrounded by people who expect so much of me, and it's okay that I'm diplomatic with them because I haven't lost my true self. If you have any degree of that in your life, you probably let a few things slip. So great book. I definitely recommend it.
Well, it just goes to show that you can never stop. No matter how old you are, you should never stop learning more about yourself and introspecting, learning about how you interact with the world and modifying it and updating it if it needs to be.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not
yes.
familiar with Martha Beck. What is her background?
She was actually raised with the Mormons.
Oh,
and her story is interesting. She had to break out of that. She had to leave her family of origin behind. She's exactly somebody who lived one way and had to then change everything to reconnect with herself, come what may. Let the chips fall where they may. This is who I am. This is what I need. And she tells some of those stories in the book. But she told many more of them in a previous book she wrote. I forget the title, Leaving the Saints, How I Lost the Mormons and Found My Faith, where she recounts the experiences of her own and, sexual abuse within the church. And it's an interesting story. So and then she did go on. It was interesting because within the Mormon church, her parents sent her to Harvard, and she had to live that double life of the crazy, liberal ideas and she acknowledges how crazy Harvard was philosophically, and coming back home and trying to integrate that, or not integrate it, but, kludge it together with what she was getting from the LDS. So it's an interesting story. If you're interested in that aspect of it, I think Amy Neeser might be. She loves these stories of people getting out of Mormonism, getting out of Scientology, getting out of cults. That would be an interesting book. But there's some of that in this book too, because it makes great examples for the subject. And with that said, unless there's any more questions, I'm ready for round two. And we're going quick, so I think we might make it all the way around.
Do we, Robert, do we want to read any super chats? Or
yes, I did miss two there. You're right.
We've got
oh no, there's more. God, I thought I was keeping an eye on that. All right. Well, thank you for reminding me, because Allie Beard is in for $5 and says Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was Mark's recommendation for me because of reasons I will not get into, but it has helped me, especially now. Allie, that is great to hear. I've read several books on grief, and it is no mean feat to handle grief graciously, whether you're the one experiencing it or helping someone through it. So thank you for reminding us of that recommendation, Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
And Mark, since it was your recommendation, is there anything in particular you wanted to say about it that you liked about that book?
That book and the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying helped me deal with the stress of my mother's passing and her quick but awful illness. So I also recommend the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying to help you sort of understand the process of dying better and what you have to do to survive that process.
We'll have to look both of those up. Some folks will know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, famous for establishing the 5 stages of grief. Kiana Pellegrino, that sounds like a familiar name, is in as well in the super chat and says Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Of course, C.S. Lewis, a great writer, a interesting thinker in terms of objectivism, but an outstanding author. So Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Thank you for that super chat. Mary Aline is in with another $2 and says Eleanor Roosevelt was also pretty creepy.
Very creepy. And they had a very creepy relationship or non-relationship.
Oh.
It was just a pretense. He was having an affair with his secretary, a long-term affair. God knows whom she was having an affair with. That's anybody's guess. But it was certainly not a relationship to write home about.
What made it creepy?
Well, that's creepy. I mean, the fact that they carried on the pretense of a relationship for show. I mean, people are going to have whatever relationships they have in private. Nothing that people do in the bedroom necessarily bothers me, provided it's consensual. But to pretend like you're a husband and wife team when you're really having an affair, behind her back, and to pretend she's something she's not, it's just, I hate that crap.
It's just dishonest. It's
Yeah, but that was him. He was a pathological liar. And he betrayed people all the time in his political circle. How this guy has a reputation for being a demigod is beyond me. Well, it's not beyond me. He's got the same ideology as the people that like to make the narrative. So they give him a pass.
Wow. That takes what I always thought was a charming quote and makes that extra creepy. Eleanor Roosevelt is credited with saying, "Comparison is the thief of joy." But
yeah,
no wonder she didn't want to compare herself to others. And Apollo Zeus is in for £5 and says, "What's the difference between check your premises and introspection?" Well, I don't know what your answer would be, but I would say it's the difference between psychology and philosophy. Check your premises is explicit.
On a very fundamental level, I think check your premises is, you've arrived at a conclusion about something, but if your premises aren't correct, then your conclusion is fallacious or could be fallacious. Introspection is merely the idea. I shouldn't say merely, because it's actually, there's no small feat to be introspective, but it's the idea of looking inward to your own motivations and reasonings for why you're doing things, and being, I think, part of that also includes being very honest with yourself about what those motivations are. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Robert put it exactly right. It's the difference between philosophy and psychology. But I mean, checking your premises is checking conclusions about a host of variables out there in the world that you may have to reevaluate. And that is more philosophical in nature than delving into your feelings and what values you've decided to embrace, and whether or not to let those values go, or to how to change those values in such ways to promote your own happiness. That's more of a psychological, but they're very intertwined. I mean, there's certainly the lines between them are a little bit blurry.
Yeah, there's got to be overlap. But yes, and Mary Elaine is in for another $2 because she had to say Eleanor was a militant altruist. God, do I love that expression, a militant altruist. It's horrible, but it's perfectly expressed. Just right. And Ashley Shrug is in for $1.99 and says Roosevelts were cousins, fifth cousins, but still, well, okay, a bit of a dig there. I don't mind a quick swipe at the Roosevelts, because whatever the merits, they certainly deserved it. So there we go. We're up to date on the super chat, but again, end of the year, feel free to put in those comments. We very much appreciate it. Any dollars and cents, pounds, shekels, whatever you've got goes to support ARC UK, and that is awesome. Now, if anyone's got a second round ready, Jax, do you have a second book that had an impact in 2022?
I can do a round two, and actually, I think I may have brought this up in one of our book club meetings. It was a book that I've been wanting a few books I've been wanting to read for a while, and it was Mark gave me the impetus to read it again. This is the complete autobiographies of Frederick Douglass. This, you can get this. It's all three books that he wrote. The very first one is Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, and that one I'll probably, because that was the first one that I read, and I read it or listened to it on audio. I highly recommend the audio because the narrator on that is brilliant. And really just like takes you back into the moment, especially when you've got like ear pods on and you just, want to go take a really long walk. And I listened to it, and it's not as if I learned anything new about slavery, but how it resonated for me in 2022 and over the last several years is I actually came away with it feeling fairly angry at people now who are trying to talk about how racism is so horrible now, because I feel like it robs people like Frederick Douglass of the real story of what really happened to them. And I don't understand how any rational, honest person could hear this man's story and read this man's story and think, oh yeah, it's just like that today. But it's very powerful. I have much love and respect for what Frederick Douglass went through to become a free man and put his entire life and family, his life at risk by writing about it courageously. So I highly recommend it. If you guys haven't read it or listened to it on audiobook, highly recommend.
Outstanding. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that. And you're right. It is just flat out an injustice to compare what's happening today. We all know that today's anti-racist movement is over the top, but to say in any way that what's happening today, whatever still needs to be done in terms of getting people to be rational about issues of race, compares to what people went through in the mid 1800s is just bizarre. It's an outrage. So thank you for that recommendation.
Cool.
Outstanding, and cannot go wrong there. Jennifer, do you have a second book for us?
No, I didn't plan a second book, but I will reiterate for any of you guys that are taking exodus from those authoritarian states to definitely read Your Rights and Responsibilities When You Move, because you need to declare those high value items. They broke my TV, and I'm super glad I declared it. You need to make sure you got the bill laid in. Make sure you follow up, because you do have rights when you move, and you got to protect yourself. So I've been without a TV for 2 weeks now, and I'm hoping to get a replacement. It is not fun. So no, I don't have any other book, but that, like I said, this has been my focus for the past 3 months. So, yeah.
Sounds like an adventure, to say the least. Real quick, back to the super chat, because Mary Aline is in for another $5. Thank you very much for that. And she says, I'm reading The Idiot by Dostoevsky. Beautifully written and compelling, though so far it's a horrific story. She says, I hate Dostoevsky. Love/hate.
I think that's how we could all say we feel about Dostoevsky. You know, he wrote that book in 22 days. He wrote The Idiot on a massive publishing deadline in 22 days. Like the brain of that man is pretty as effed up as it is. Was very intelligent.
To be able to do that in 3 weeks, that's just too much in one brain. Maybe that's part of the problem. Thank you for that, Mary Aline. Jonathan Honig is in with $1.99, just letting us know he's out there. Thank you, as always, to our co-host. Allie Beard is in again with $5 and says, Black Slave Owners of South Carolina by Larry Kroger. I thought the book was knowledgeable and read like a story, still learning about slavery. Allie, you have my sympathy knowing where you live in that part of the United States, because I was talking to a friend of ours who lives in Nashville that came down from Michigan. And this is a couple who are still running into, there are people out there down in the South who, and she's saying it's most of the people they run into, who are still saying, well, states' rights. And, there was a lot of valid stuff going on in the Confederacy. And slavery, yeah, it was bad, but, it wasn't that bad. Anyway, thank you for that.
In that respect, they're in alignment with the libertarian movement that does the very same thing. They talk about the states' rights orientation. They even cite John C. Calhoun as one of their intellectuals, who's probably one of the most evil members of Congress for his rationalizations for the institution of slavery that I could come up with. And they denigrate Lincoln too. And there's reasons to denigrate Lincoln. He certainly did do things that that set the modern state on its footing. But by the same token, he was an abolitionist, whether they claim he was or not. He was an abolitionist. That's what the Republicans were. They were Whigs with an abolitionist platform. And he carried through the emancipation. And for that, that sort of cancels out pretty much every other sin he committed in office, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well said.
Couldn't agree more. Outstanding. Nick Bruno is in with $10 too, just to say thank you. Thank you for that, Nick. Thanks right back at you. And Equal to Reality in for £2 says, keep it up, guys. And it's fricking freezing here. I haven't even been following weather in the UK, in our host country, but hopefully y'all are managing that there as well as we are managing it here. I swear when folks told me what the weather was like where they were at, some of y'all would be, oh no, things are great in California, in Hollywood, but no, everybody's off the left coast. And
Are you back in LA now, Mark?
I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm in Pittsburgh.
Are you still okay? How cold is it there?
It's warm now. It's in the high 30s.
It's warm. It's in the high 30s.
Down to -5. Yeah, now you can run it t-shirt weather now.
Oh,
I have a second book though. Regina sort of stole my thunder, of course, because mine is Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. I think that is an extremely important book. I think Alex, almost more than any other objectivist out there, is affecting the conversation in his genre, right? And in the field of energy, he's influencing a lot of people, and a lot of what he says is starting to become part of the lexicon now in the conversation. And I think that's very important. What he does in that book is he attacks the climate issue from a completely different perspective than everybody else out there, and namely as a knowledge and information problem and an integration problem, so that people are not attacking the issue of climate change and pollution from the full context of human flourishing or human life. Let's just say human life at first, but flourishing for us subjectivists means something. So he includes that perspective. He takes the standard from zero emissions, which he says is an anti-human flourishing standard, and puts it into a human flourishing standard. And what would an energy policy look like with a human flourishing standard, and with an information center, information establishment that disseminates real, integrated, contextualized information, as opposed to what they actually do, which is promote an agenda by ignoring a lot of stuff, including how human beings live, what we need to live, and what we need to thrive. So this book really contextualizes the climate issue. It puts it in a philosophical frame that I think it needs, and I think everyone needs to use it as a template for organizing their thoughts around the climate problem. And if everybody does that, we're going to have a much, much better world, particularly in California, where I want to move. I want to move away from there, because California is primarily going down the tubes because of its climate, its addiction to the climate ideology, the climate change ideology. So they're making life a lot more expensive and a lot more uncomfortable for people to fulfill their ideology. And Alex, I think, and maybe a Michael Schellenberger with Apocalypse Never.
I was just going to ask you how you could compare the two of those books. Like, what does Alex's book build upon from Michael's book, or are they even in the same?
I think Alex's is much more fundamental. It's a philosophical analysis of the errors in the transmission of knowledge and in the contextualization of knowledge itself. Whereas Michael Schellenberger gets on the ground in various countries and shows you the particulars, the effects of these climate policies on various third world countries that need to up their energy output. Of course, they need to grab onto fossil fuels like the life preservers that they are, and become wealthy, which is a dirty business. And so he demonstrates how as does Paul Dreesen in Eco-Imperialists. They demonstrate how these policies are really keeping people down. So one's a guy who focuses on the particulars, the other guy is broad brush, philosophical and conceptual.
Outstanding. And in that may well have to be my vote for the book of the year, given all of the great suggestions we've had so far, because of what's happening in the rest of the kind of new intellectuals or intellectual dark web, especially with people like William McCaskill and the recent trend from effective altruism into what he's calling long-termism, which I think a lot of folks are going to confuse for being full context, taking the full context into account. It's long-term. We're taking everything into account. No, Alex Epstein is the one who takes everything into account. the full context. And you're right, that is what he brings to the table. And above and beyond the energy, he is saying everything matters. You don't get to ignore stuff. So yeah, that may well be my vote of all the outstanding books that we have mentioned so far. A Fractured Mind, A Brief History of Time, New Deal or Raw Deal. Links to all of these are in the chat, posted by our producer. Of course, the biographies of Frederick Douglass, but Fossil Future. Yeah, talk about books that may well be saving the world. Ironically, given that what it is that he's fighting, these people who think they're saving the world or posture at saving the world.
I think that's the way they live with themselves at night, because if they really understood that their policies were killing people in the third world, people that they claim to love more than anything else in anything else, right?
Yes.
If they knew that, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night.
So is that your second book recommendation, Robert? Or do you have another one?
I will bring in another one just so that we don't have duplicates, because I've been enjoying Facets of Ayn Rand. You can still find these in print, but the Ayn Rand Institute this year released it section at a time. I think there's 8 parts on the web. You can now read the whole book on the web. Facets of Ayn Rand by Marianne and Charles Suarez. And it's adorable. And so, just to end on a lighter note, it is an adorable collection of interviews from Marianne Suarez, and there's some by Charles Suarez as well, about what it was like working with Ayn Rand, being with Ayn Rand during the Atlas Shrugged years in particular. It's where we get the expression copper pot objectivists, if you've heard that term before. There's the story in there about Ayn Rand Marianne Suarez went to Ayn Rand one day and asked if she could talk to her. And Ayn Rand was like this. You would go to her and say, I have something significant to discuss with you. And Ayn Rand would schedule time. She took everything seriously, even the lightest things, not in a serious way, but in the sense of taking you seriously. And they get together later, and Marianne Suarez talks to Ayn Rand about, she had in her kitchen, she had a copper pot that she polished and kept it beautiful. And how beautiful real copper cookware can be. But some of her friends in the objectivist community had criticized her for having such non-intellectual values. And I won't give the whole story because you definitely should read it. It's far more charming than I can relay it. But Ayn Rand made the point to her that, not only can you find the objective value in wanting to maintain the things that you own and keep a pleasant appearance about your home, but even if you in that moment can't fully justify that value, never give it up, never abandon it just because people are questioning it. A certain amount of resilience. It's not that you wouldn't drop something that turned out to be irrational, but you need resilience. You need to hold on to what you value. And it's now referred to as the copper pot story. But point is, anybody now can read it in this book, which was getting hard to find. It had been out of print. And now ARI has made it available publicly on the internet. Facets of Ayn Rand by Marianne Suarez and Charles Suarez. So something light to end on, but these outstanding recommendations from the whole team. I love the book of the month segments, but this book of the year really is giving me some ammunition, some ones that I need to pick up, haven't read yet. Thank you all for that. Now, we've got upcoming shows at 7 p.m. UK time. So coming up at the top of the hour, the Briefly Objective premiere. And this time it's Harry Binswanger on What Hayek Can't See. That's going to be good. At 10 p.m. UK time, that's me, Life on Earth with Robert Nasir on resolutions, goals, and integrity. So I'm going to take some of these ideas about integrity I've talked about this year, tie them into the new year, a New Year's celebration. But I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. TDO, the Daily Objective 661. It will be that 2022, looking back on the year. But this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much to the Thursday Collective.
We have a few more super chats that I just want to shout out
good.
to. So I'll read those quickly. Mary Elaine for $5 says, Frederick Douglass is a hero. I second the recommendation of his autobiographies. A great self-made man who understood individual rights. Absolutely. He really did. And he did not have very positive things to say about religion either. What kind of religion is it? What kind of a God is it that enslaves a man? But yes, absolutely agree with that.
Can I just give Frederick Douglass honorable mention as a founding father?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
As I would Rand.
Mm-hmm.
The last 150 years have certainly been influenced by what that man did. And he showed the way. He really did show the way to defeat evil, both effectively and with personal dignity. It's one of those stories where if it wasn't his own words, it would almost be hard to believe. And I on that subject, Allie, who I mentioned, deals with some of these challenges of residual racism in the South more than most of us. She says, I did find a Confederate battle flag at the bottom of my parents' closet yesterday. If that says anything about the South from earlier discussion. And she wraps up the comment by saying trash. Well, thank you for the super chat, Allie, and you absolutely have my sympathy in that regard. And Jeff Bannister, who has been an enormous supporter of the Ayn Rand Center UK, yesterday on my show with James Valiant, he put in a record-breaking contribution and is in for another $10 today. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. It's great to see all the support in the chat and the regular chat too today as we get close to the end of the year. The support for the Ayn Rand Center UK.
I have to read a funny comment. It's not a super chat, but yeah. Robin here and says, "What will the Daily Objective 666 be about?"
Somebody asked me that earlier online. I don't know, because episode 69 was kind of wasted, so I'm not sure if we'll do 666 right or not. We will see. They wanted a good episode 422, and that didn't happen. We'll see what they do with 666. That's almost irresistible, given it seems like, Mark, you would have to be on that show, and we have to do something good with it.
Daniel says it'll be a Thursday
horror films.
Yeah, Daniel says it's going to be a Thursday collective. The Daily Objective 666 will be a Thursday collective. So,
well, as long as we have the right topic, that could be pretty damn good.
Horror movie sounds good.
So thanks again. Again, this has been the Thursday Collective Book of the Month, Book of the Year edition of that on the Daily Objective. Huge shout out to all the co-hosts on the show. Another great discussion. Thank you to the Ayn Rand Center UK for making these shows happen. Thank you to our super chatters and everybody who's a member. If you're not already a member of the ARC UK, click the link at the top of the chat there. Become a member. We have all the cool kids are. That's what you need to do. This has been a great discussion. Looking forward to talking to all of you again very soon.
Happy New Year to everybody, too.
Happy New Year.